The act of bravery. The sun hung low over the suburban landscape, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Michael Evans, a 12-year-old boy with deep brown skin and intelligent eyes, pedaled his bicycle home from his daily chores, his mind filled with thoughts of homework and soccer practice. Michael was known throughout the neighborhood as a boy who always stood up for what was right, a trait he had inherited from his mother, Lena. She had raised him with a deep sense of morality and courage, teaching him that no matter how small the action, standing up for others was never a mistake. Michael's neighborhood was a vibrant mix of cultures and backgrounds, a melting pot of people who, for the most part, lived peacefully together. His own family had struggled financially since his father had passed away when he was just 5. Lena worked long shifts as a nurse at the local hospital, often leaving Michael to fend for himself during the evenings. Still, despite the hardships, Lena ensured that Michael knew the importance of kindness, empathy, and justice. It was on one of these typical evenings when Michael's life changed forever. Riding past the local grocery store on his way home, he heard raised voices. Michael slowed down, curiosity pulling him closer. Through the large glass windows of the store, he saw an elderly white couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, being harassed by a group of rowdy teenagers. The Thompsons were longtime residents of the neighborhood, and though Michael didn't know them well, they were familiar faces. The couple often walked around hand in hand, looking after their small garden and sharing quiet, polite smiles with neighbors. Inside the store, the scene was escalating. The teens, 5 of them, all boys a few years older than Michael, were circling the couple, their voices growing louder, mocking and jeering. "Hey, old man, you forget where you park your walker," one of the teens sneered. "Leave them alone." Mrs. Thompson's voice trembled, but she stood her ground. The teens laughed, their taunts growing meaner. The store employees seemed hesitant to intervene, and the few customers in the store simply watched from a distance, uncertain of how to react. Michael felt his heart race. His mother had always taught him to speak up against injustice, no matter how scared he felt. But this was different. These teens were bigger, meaner, and there was no telling what they might do if challenged. Yet as he watched Mr. Thompson's face flush with embarrassment, something inside Michael snapped. He dropped his bike, his feet moving faster than his thoughts as he pushed open the grocery store doors and marched right up to the group of teens. "Hey!" Michael's voice was louder than he expected, surprising even himself. "Leave them alone." The teenagers turned, sizing him up with smirks. The leader of the group, a tall boy with a cocky grin, stepped forward. "And who are you, kid?" The hero of the day. Michael's knees trembled, but he stood firm. "Just leave them alone. They didn't do anything to you." The boys exchanged glances, some snickering, but they weren't prepared for a real confrontation. One of them muttered something under his breath, and the leader, perhaps sensing the growing discomfort in his group, finally shrugged. "Whatever. Let's go." The teens filed out of the store, still chuckling, but the tension in the air eased as soon as they were gone. Michael let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson looked at him, a mixture of relief and gratitude in their eyes. "Thank you, young man," Mr. Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't stepped in." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch Michael's arm. "You're a brave boy. What you did, well, that takes a lot of courage." Michael, feeling suddenly shy, just nodded. "It's no big deal," he mumbled. "I was just doing the right thing." The elderly couple offered to walk him home as a gesture of gratitude, but Michael politely declined, feeling that his mother would be worried if he didn't return soon. As he left the store, mounting his bicycle once more, he couldn't shake the strange feeling of satisfaction mixed with nervousness that had settled in his chest. He had stood up to bullies before, but never like this, and never in such a public way. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden hue over the neighborhood, Michael couldn't help but feel a small spark of pride in what he had done. He knew that standing up for the Thompsons was the right thing, even if it hadn't been easy. His mother's lessons had proven true yet again. But what Michael didn't know was that his simple act of bravery had set into motion a series of events that would soon turn his world upside down. The next morning dawned bright and early. Michael awoke to the sound of his mother moving about in the kitchen, preparing breakfast before her long shift at the hospital. He groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes as the memories of the previous day floated back to him. For a brief moment, he wondered if the confrontation at the store had just been a dream. But then his thoughts were interrupted by the unmistakable hum of a vehicle pulling up outside. Michael peered through the curtains of his small bedroom window. Parked directly in front of his house was a sleek, black SUV, its windows tinted, the kind of car that didn't belong in a neighborhood like his. His brow furrowed in confusion. No one in the neighborhood owned such a vehicle, and Michael had a sinking feeling in his stomach as he watched it idle there, engine still running. "What is that?" Lena's voice startled him from behind. She had appeared in his doorway, her eyes also drawn to the strange car outside. "I don't know," Michael said. "It just showed up." His mother's face tightened with concern. "Stay inside," she said, her tone serious. "I'll go see who it is." Michael's pulse quickened as his mother stepped outside, her hands nervously wiping on her apron as she approached the mysterious vehicle. From his vantage point, Michael could see her talking to the driver, but he couldn't make out what was being said. After a few tense minutes, the SUV pulled away, leaving Lena standing alone in the street, a troubled look etched across her face. When she came back inside, Michael immediately asked, "Who was it? What did they want?" Lena hesitated, her eyes scanning her son's face. "They wanted to talk to you." "To me?" Michael blinked in surprise. "Why?" His mother didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him to sit down at the kitchen table. "They said it's about what happened yesterday at the grocery store." Michael's stomach dropped. "But why?" "I didn't do anything wrong." Lena gave him a soft, reassuring smile, though the worry in her eyes remained. "No, you didn't, but it seems like your bravery might have caught someone's attention." Michael stared at his mother, a thousand questions swirling in his mind. Who were the people in the SUV? What did they want with him? And why had a simple act of standing up for someone led to this strange encounter? As the questions piled up, Michael couldn't help but feel that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. The unexpected encounter. Michael sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing. The black SUV had vanished from sight, but the unsettling feeling it left behind still lingered in the air like a heavy cloud. His mother, Lena, moved around the kitchen with a forced calmness, but Michael could sense her unease. She had always been a steady force in his life, her strength and resilience never faltering, even through the toughest of times. But now, for the first time, Michael saw uncertainty in her eyes. "What did they want, Mom?" Michael finally asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Lena paused, her hands trembling slightly as she placed a cup of tea in front of Michael. She sat down across from him, her usually composed face now shadowed with concern. "They didn't say much, just that they wanted to talk to you. They said they'd be back later today. Something about an opportunity." "An opportunity," Michael repeated, confusion washing over him. "What does that even mean?" Lena shook her head. "I'm not sure, baby. But I don't like it. Strangers don't just show up at your house like this, unless something unusual is going on." Michael's mind raced back to the incident at the grocery store. The group of teenagers, the way he had stood up to them, the relief on Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's faces. Could that have something to do with this mysterious visit? But why would defending an elderly couple bring a sleek, intimidating car to his front door? "I didn't do anything wrong, though," Michael said again, almost as if trying to convince himself. "No, of course you didn't," Lena reassured him. "But sometimes, doing the right thing can draw attention from people you don't expect." Michael nodded, but the pit in his stomach remained. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of unanswered questions. Lena tried to keep things normal, moving around the house and keeping busy, but every now and then, Michael caught her glancing out the window, as if waiting for something or someone. He couldn't focus on his usual routine, and even when he tried to do his homework, his thoughts kept drifting back to the SUV. As noon approached, Michael heard the familiar hum of an engine pulling up outside. His heart skipped a beat, and he rushed to the window. The black SUV was back, parked in the same spot as before. This time, the engine cut off, and the driver's door opened. A tall man, dressed in a dark suit, stepped out. He was older, maybe in his late 40s, with sharp features and a clean-shaven face. His hair was neatly combed, and he moved with an air of confidence that made Michael feel even more nervous. The man glanced around the neighborhood before making his way up the driveway. "Mom," Michael whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "He's here." Lena appeared by his side, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Stay behind me," she instructed, her voice firm. She opened the door just as the man reached the front porch. "Good afternoon," the man said, his voice smooth and polite. "My name is Mr. Harrison. I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I'd like to speak with your son, Michael, if that's all right." Lena's eyes narrowed. "What's this about? Why are you here?" Mr. Harrison smiled, though there was something unsettling about how calm he seemed. "It's nothing to be alarmed about, ma'am. In fact, I believe it's a rather fortunate matter. I work with a private organization that has taken notice of Michael's actions yesterday at the grocery store. We're always on the lookout for individuals who display strong moral character, especially at such a young age. We believe Michael might be someone we could help, someone we could invest in. Invest in." Lena's voice was incredulous. "What does that even mean?" "He's a child. You can't just show up at our house and start talking about investments like he's some kind of—" "I understand your concerns," Mr. Harrison interrupted, his tone still calm. "But please, allow me to explain. Michael demonstrated exceptional courage yesterday. He stood up for what was right, even when others were afraid to do so. That's the kind of character our organization values deeply. We believe that with the right guidance and support, Michael could grow into someone who makes an even greater impact on the world." Michael, who had been standing quietly behind his mother, finally spoke up. "But why me? I just did what anyone would have done." Mr. Harrison turned his gaze toward Michael, his eyes sharp but kind. "That's precisely why we're interested in you. Most people wouldn't have done what you did. They would have stayed quiet, maybe even looked the other way. But you didn't. You acted, and that's rare." Lena crossed her arms, clearly unconvinced. "So what is it you're offering exactly? And what does this organization want with my son?" Mr. Harrison hesitated for the first time, as if choosing his next words carefully. "We offer a program for young individuals like Michael, a mentorship of sorts. We provide resources, education, and opportunities to help them grow into leaders, people who can make a real difference in their communities. And while the program is demanding, it's also incredibly rewarding. Michael would have access to resources most kids his age couldn't even dream of." Lena's eyes narrowed even further. "And what's the catch?" "There's always a catch with things like this." "There's no catch," Mr. Harrison assured her. "But there is a commitment. If Michael chooses to join our program, he will need to dedicate a significant amount of his time and energy to it. It's not something to be taken lightly. However, the benefits are immeasurable." Michael listened intently, trying to make sense of it all. It sounded too good to be true. A mysterious organization offering him opportunities, resources, and mentorship. Why him? What did they really want? Lena wasn't convinced either. "I need more information before I can even consider this," she said firmly. "You can't just come into our lives and expect us to hand over our child to some vague program we know nothing about." "Of course," Mr. Harrison nodded, understanding. "I'll leave some materials for you to review. Take your time to discuss it with Michael." There's no pressure to make a decision immediately. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a sleek black folder, handing it to Lena. Everything you need to know about the program is in here. My contact information is also included. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out. Lena took the folder but didn't open it. She remained guarded, her protective instincts in full force. "We'll think about it," she said, her voice cool. Mr. Harrison smiled again, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's all I ask. Thank you for your time." With that, he turned and walked back to the SUV. As the car pulled away from the curb, Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena stared at the folder in her hands, her face unreadable. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't like how this came out of nowhere. It feels strange." Michael nodded, his thoughts tangled. The offer sounded like an incredible opportunity, but something about it made him uneasy. What was this mysterious organization? And why had they chosen him? Lena placed the folder on the kitchen counter and sighed. "Let's not make any decisions right now. We'll look at the information together. But we need to be careful, Michael. Opportunities like this don't just fall into your lap without a reason. We need to figure out what that reason is." As the day wore on, the questions continued to pile up. The black SUV had driven away, but the mystery it left behind was far from over. And as much as Michael wanted to believe that this was a chance to make a difference, something in his gut told him that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. For better or worse, the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and all Michael could do was prepare for whatever was coming next. The offer. That evening, the weight of the day hung over Michael and his mother like a storm cloud, thick with questions and uncertainty. After dinner, Lena finally sat down at the kitchen table, the sleek black folder Mr. Harrison had left sitting unopened in front of her. Michael watched as she hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of the folder before she slowly opened it. Inside were several neatly organized papers, each bearing the logo of a company neither of them had ever heard of, Crestfall Initiatives. It sounded official, but it was unfamiliar. Lena's brow furrowed as she scanned the first page, her eyes moving quickly over the neatly typed words. Michael leaned forward, anxious to know what it all meant. "What does it say?" Lena didn't respond right away, her attention fixed on the document. After a few moments, she set it down and looked at her son, her expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. It's more than I expected. They're offering you a full scholarship to a private school, one of the best in the state. They'll provide tutors, leadership training, and even trips abroad for cultural immersion and community service." Michael's eyes widened. "All of that? For standing up to some bullies? It seems like more than that," Lena murmured, flipping to the next page. "They're calling it a leadership initiative. They say they want to train you to be a leader in your community, to develop your potential." Michael's heart raced at the sound of those words. A full scholarship, leadership training, trips abroad. It sounded like something out of a dream. He thought back to the crowded hallways of his public school, where he often felt invisible among the sea of students. This opportunity, if it was real, could change everything. "Mom, this sounds amazing," Michael said, excitement bubbling up inside him. "This could be my chance to do something great. I mean, I've always wanted to make a difference, to help people like you taught me. This could be it." Lena didn't share his enthusiasm, her gaze still fixed on the papers in front of her. "It does sound amazing," she admitted. "But Michael, this kind of offer doesn't just come out of nowhere. What do they want in return? It says here that you'll have to commit to their program fully, which means your time, your energy, everything. I'm not sure what their endgame is." Michael frowned, not wanting to believe that there could be a downside to something that seemed so perfect. Maybe they just want to help people, like they said. Maybe they see something in me. Lena closed the folder and leaned back in her chair, letting out a long sigh. I don't want to be suspicious of everything, but I've lived long enough to know that people rarely offer something for nothing. We need to think about this carefully. I want to make sure this is really what's best for you." Michael fell silent, his excitement tempered by his mother's caution. He knew she was right. Lena had always been the voice of reason in his life, steering him away from bad decisions and keeping him grounded. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was his big chance, the break he had been waiting for. Later that night, as Michael lay in bed, he stared up at the ceiling, his mind swirling with possibilities. He imagined himself in a new school, surrounded by smart, driven students. He imagined going on trips to faraway countries, helping people and learning about the world in ways he had only ever seen on TV. And most of all, he imagined making his mother proud, showing her that all her hard work and sacrifices had paid off. But alongside the excitement, there was a nagging doubt that wouldn't go away. Why had this mysterious organization taken an interest in him? What was their real motive? The next morning, Michael woke to find Lena already in the kitchen, sipping her coffee and staring out the window. Deep in thought, the black folder still sat on the table, a silent reminder of the decision they had to make. "Did you sleep on it?" Lena asked when she saw him shuffle into the room. Michael nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, but I'm still not sure what to think." Lena gave him a small smile, though her eyes were still filled with concern. "I've been thinking too. We need more information before we decide anything. I don't want to make a choice that we'll regret later." Just as they were about to sit down and discuss their next steps, a knock came at the door. Michael's heart jumped, and he exchanged a quick glance with his mother before they both stood up. The knock was firm but not aggressive, and when Lena opened the door, Mr. Harrison stood there once again, this time with a calm, expectant look on his face. "Good morning," he greeted them with that same smooth politeness. "I wanted to follow up and see if you had any questions about our offer." Lena stepped aside to let him in, though her body language remained cautious. Mr. Harrison walked into the living room, glancing around as if assessing their modest home. Michael noticed the way his eyes briefly lingered on the worn furniture and the small TV in the corner. The man's gaze returned to Lena and Michael, and his smile softened. "I know this might seem overwhelming," Mr. Harrison said, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "But I assure you, this is a genuine offer. We're not here to pressure you. We simply see potential in Michael, potential that we believe could be nurtured in the right environment." Lena crossed her arms, her protective stance unwavering. "I've read through the materials, Mr. Harrison, and while I appreciate the opportunity, I have concerns. Why my son? What exactly does your organization get out of this?" Mr. Harrison seemed prepared for the question. Crestfall Initiatives is funded by a group of philanthropists who believe in shaping the next generation of leaders. We focus on finding young people who have demonstrated exceptional character, courage, empathy, a sense of justice, and we give them the tools to develop into leaders who can make a difference in the world. We don't expect anything in return other than that they continue to carry those values with them as they grow. "That sounds noble," Lena said, her tone cautious. "But I still don't understand why you're focusing on Michael. He's a good kid, but he's only 12. What makes him so special to you?" Mr. Harrison's gaze shifted to Michael, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were studying him. "Your son stepped up when no one else did. He put himself at risk to defend someone who couldn't defend themselves. That kind of courage, especially in someone so young, is rare. It's exactly the kind of quality we look for. And while you may not think of him as special, we see in him the potential to grow into a remarkable leader." Michael felt a strange mix of pride and pressure at those words. He had never considered himself a leader, but hearing Mr. Harrison say it made him wonder if maybe he could be. Could this program really help him become something more? Or was it all just too good to be true? Lena remained skeptical. If we were to agree, what would Michael's life look like? How much time would this program take? He's still a child. He needs time to be a kid. Mr. Harrison nodded understandingly. The program is designed to complement his education, not replace it. He would attend Crestfall Academy, a private school where we have a more personalized curriculum focused on leadership and community engagement. It's a full-time commitment, but there's room for balance. Michael will still have time for family, friends, and extracurricular activities. And of course, you'd have the final say in all decisions. Lena glanced at Michael, her brow furrowed. And what happens if we decide this isn't for him down the line? Can he leave the program? Of course, Mr. Harrison assured her. We don't force anyone to stay. If at any point Michael or your family feels that this isn't the right fit, you're free to withdraw. There's no penalty and no strings attached. Lena considered this for a long moment, and the room grew silent. Michael could feel the tension between his desire to leap at the opportunity and his mother's natural caution. Finally, Lena looked at Michael. What do you think? Michael hesitated. He knew how much this decision meant, not just for him, but for their family. It could be the opportunity of a lifetime, but there was also the risk of the unknown. His mother had always protected him, always guided him, and he trusted her judgment. But this time, he felt like the choice was his to make. I want to try it, Michael said quietly, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. I know it sounds too good to be true, but it feels like something I should at least try. If it doesn't work out, we can always walk away, right? Lena studied his face, her expression softening slightly. She saw the hope in his eyes, the yearning for something more. And though her protective instincts still made her wary, she couldn't deny that this was an opportunity Michael might never get again. All right, she said finally, her voice low but resolute. We'll give it a try. But, she added, turning to Mr. Harrison, if anything feels off, if at any point I feel this isn't right for Michael, we're out. No questions, no hesitations. Mr. Harrison nodded, his smile returning. Of course. We understand completely. With the decision made, Michael felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. What lay ahead was still a mystery, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. As Mr. Harrison left, leaving the folder with a formal acceptance form on the table, Michael couldn't help but wonder what his future would hold. Would this opportunity really help him become the person he hoped to be, or was there something more lurking beneath the surface of this too-good-to-be-true offer? Only time would tell. The academy. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. After Michael and Lena formally accepted the offer from Crestfall Initiatives, life began to move at an almost dizzying pace. The private academy where Michael would attend, Crestfall Academy, was located about an hour outside their neighborhood in a sprawling, affluent area that seemed worlds apart from the modest streets Michael had always known. The school itself was unlike anything Michael had ever imagined. On the day of his orientation, as they pulled up in front of the imposing gates, his heart raced. The academy campus looked more like a prestigious university than a school for middle and high school students. The buildings were made of gleaming stone, with large windows and towering spires that made them look like castles. The grounds were meticulously kept, with lush gardens, open courtyards, and fountains that sparkled under the sunlight. Michael's eyes widened as he took it all in. "This is where I'm going to school?" he asked, half in awe, half in disbelief. Lena, sitting next to him in the car, seemed just as surprised. "I guess so," she murmured, her voice tinged with a hint of concern. The grandeur of the place was overwhelming, and while part of her was thrilled that Michael would have access to such incredible resources, another part of her worried about whether they were getting in too deep. They parked in a designated spot and made their way toward the main administration building, where they were greeted by a woman dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. She introduced herself as Ms. Davis, the Academy's head of admissions, and she had an air of formality that immediately put Michael on edge. "Welcome to Crestfall Academy, Michael," she said with a practiced smile. "We're thrilled to have you join us. I'll be giving you and your mother a tour of the campus today, and then we'll go over the details of your schedule and what you can expect as part of our leadership program." Michael nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness as he followed Ms. Davis across the manicured lawns. Lena walked beside him, her eyes darting around, taking in every detail. As they toured the campus, Ms. Davis pointed out the state-of-the-art facilities. There were science labs with cutting-edge technology, an expansive library filled with rare books and digital resources, and even an athletic center that rivaled professional sports complexes. It was clear that no expense had been spared in making Crestfall Academy one of the best schools in the country. "This is where you'll have access to some of the finest educational tools available," Ms. Davis explained, her tone polished and professional. "We believe that leadership is not just about having good intentions. It's about being well-prepared, well-informed, and well-rounded. Our curriculum is designed to challenge students academically, socially, and ethically." Michael tried to absorb everything she was saying, but it was hard to focus with so much to take in. He couldn't help but feel like an outsider in this environment. The other students they passed on the tour looked different, dressed in tailored uniforms, their shoes polished and hair neatly styled. They moved with a sense of belonging that Michael couldn't quite relate to. Ms. Davis seemed to sense his unease. "I understand this may feel like a big change, Michael," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But you were chosen for a reason. We see great potential in you. Over time, you'll find your place here, just as many others have." Michael nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of his depth. Crestfall Academy was far removed from the world he had known, and as much as he wanted to believe that this was an opportunity to grow, he couldn't help but feel intimidated by the sheer magnitude of it all. After the tour, Ms. Davis led them into a large conference room, where Mr. Harrison was waiting, seated at a long, polished table. He stood when they entered, greeting them with the same calm and polished demeanor as before. "Michael, Mrs. Adams, I hope the tour has given you a good sense of what Crestfall Academy has to offer," Mr. Harrison said, his tone warm but still professional. "Now, I'd like to go over some important details about the program you're entering, Michael." Michael and Lena sat down, and Mr. Harrison slid a few documents across the table. "This is the official leadership program agreement," he said, tapping the papers lightly. "It outlines the commitments you'll need to make. You'll be expected to maintain a high academic standard, of course, but beyond that, you'll be involved in a series of projects that focus on community service, leadership training, and personal development. It will be demanding, but I have no doubt that you're capable." Michael picked up the papers and skimmed over them, feeling a knot form in his stomach. The expectations were intense. In addition to his regular schoolwork, he would be required to participate in weekly leadership seminars, monthly community service projects, and biannual international trips designed to expose him to different cultures and challenges. There would also be one-on-one mentorship sessions with members of the Crestfall team, including Mr. Harrison himself. As Michael continued reading, Lena glanced at Mr. Harrison, her skepticism still evident. "This seems like a lot for a 12-year-old, she said. "How do you expect him to manage all of this and still have time to be a kid?" Mr. Harrison smiled, his expression understanding. "It is a lot, Mrs. Adams, but we believe that young people are capable of far more than we often give them credit for. The program is designed to push Michael, yes, but it's also designed to support him. He'll have mentors, tutors, and counselors available to him at all times. And while the workload may seem heavy, we make sure that students have time to relax and enjoy their childhood. Balance is key." Lena remained quiet, clearly still processing everything. Michael, on the other hand, felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. He wanted to believe that he could handle it, that he could rise to the challenge, but the sheer scale of what was being asked of him was daunting. "There's one more thing I should mention," Mr. Harrison said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Crestfall Initiatives is about more than just creating future leaders. We believe in fostering a sense of responsibility and giving back to the communities that shape us. Michael, you'll be expected to develop and lead a community project of your own design, something that reflects your values and your desire to make a difference. Michael's eyes widened. A project? Like I have to come up with something on my own? Mr. Harrison nodded. Exactly. It's a major component of the program. We want you to identify a need in your community and create a plan to address it. You'll have support from our team, of course, but the project will be yours to lead. It's a way to put your leadership skills into practice in a real-world setting. Michael's mind raced. He had never thought about leading a project before, let alone one that could have a real impact on his community. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. After a long silence, Lena finally spoke. "We'll need some time to think this over," she said, her voice firm. "I want to make sure Michael understands what he's getting into, and I want to make sure this is really the right fit for him." Mr. Harrison nodded, his expression respectful. "Of course. Take all the time you need. We want this to be a positive experience for both of you." As they left the academy and drove back home, Michael stared out the window, his thoughts spinning. The tour had been impressive, the offer enticing, but the weight of the responsibility ahead of him felt enormous. Could he really handle all of it? Would he be able to balance his schoolwork, his new leadership role, and the expectations of Crestfall initiatives? When they arrived back at their house, the familiar surroundings of their modest neighborhood brought Michael a strange sense of comfort. As much as he had dreamed of something bigger, something more, the reality of it all was hitting him harder than he had expected. Lena parked the car and turned to her son. "What do you think, Michael?" she asked softly. "I know this is a lot to take in." Michael sighed, his heart heavy with indecision. "I don't know, Mom. It's exciting, but it's also scary. What if I can't handle it?" Lena reached over and gently squeezed his hand. "You don't have to decide right now. We'll figure this out together. But whatever you choose, Michael, I'll be proud of you." Her words brought a small smile to his face, but the uncertainty still lingered. That night, as he lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, Michael couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Was this opportunity truly as good as it seemed, or were there hidden challenges waiting for him? He had no way of knowing. All he could do was take it one step at a time and hope that, in the end, he had made the right choice. As sleep finally began to take hold, Michael made a silent promise to himself. No matter what, he would give this opportunity everything he had. Even if it was hard, even if it was scary, he would rise to the challenge. He owed that much to himself and to his mother. The pressure of expectations. The first week at Crestfall Academy was a whirlwind for Michael. From the moment he stepped through the grand stone gates, it felt like he had been thrust into a new world. Everything was so different, almost intimidating. His old school had been loud, chaotic, and packed with hundreds of kids just trying to get through the day. Crestfall, on the other hand, exuded an air of discipline and purpose. There was no room for mediocrity here. Michael quickly realized that everyone at Crestfall seemed to already know their place. The other students, most of whom came from wealthy and influential families, carried themselves with confidence. They seemed to glide through the school halls like they belonged there, like they had always been destined for greatness. It wasn't just their fancy clothes or the expensive gadgets they carried. It was the way they looked at the world, and the way they seemed to expect the world to look back at them with admiration. Michael, on the other hand, felt like an outsider from the start. He could see it in the way some of the students glanced at him, eyes flicking over his simpler clothes, or the way they barely acknowledged him in the cafeteria. It wasn't overt, but he could feel the subtle distance between him and them. They knew he wasn't one of them, and despite his scholarship, it was clear that earning their respect would be far more difficult than excelling in the classroom. Despite the initial awkwardness, Michael found himself determined to make it work. The leadership program was intense, as expected, but it was also exciting. The classes were small, and the teachers were engaging, pushing the students to think critically and challenge themselves. Michael's favorite class quickly became ethics and leadership, where they studied great leaders from history and discussed what made them stand out. He found the lessons inspiring, and for the first time, he began to truly see leadership as something he could aspire to. But it wasn't just the academics that demanded Michael's attention. Almost immediately, he felt the pressure to live up to the expectations placed on him by Crestfall initiatives. The first few weeks were filled with meetings and seminars, where he was introduced to the structure of the leadership program. Each week, Michael and the other students in the program were required to meet with their mentors to discuss their progress. Mr. Harrison, who had taken a special interest in Michael, was his personal mentor. In their first session together, Mr. Harrison's sharp, calculating eyes had seemed to strip away any layers of doubt or hesitation that Michael had. The man had a way of making Michael feel both empowered and slightly on edge. "Michael," Mr. Harrison said as they sat in his office during their first formal meeting, "you have more potential than you realize. But potential is useless without focus. Do you understand what I mean?" Michael nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. "I think so." Mr. Harrison leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Good. What you did for that elderly couple at the store shows that you have the instinct to do the right thing, even when it's hard. But instinct needs to be honed. Here at Crestfall, we're not just interested in creating leaders who follow their gut. We want leaders who know how to turn their good intentions into real impact." Michael shifted in his seat, feeling a mix of admiration and anxiety. "So, how do I do that?" Mr. Harrison smiled slightly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's exactly what we're going to figure out together. Your first task, as part of this program, is to identify a problem in your community and create a project to solve it. This project isn't just a test, it's the beginning of your legacy." Legacy. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Michael had never thought about leaving a legacy before. He was just trying to survive in a school where most people seemed to have everything figured out, and here was Mr. Harrison, talking about legacies like it was something Michael should have been planning all his life. "What kind of project are you thinking about?" Mr. Harrison asked, his tone making it clear that he expected an answer. Michael hesitated. The truth was, he hadn't really thought about it yet. He hadn't had time. Between trying to catch up with his classes, figure out the social dynamics, and keep up with the program's expectations, he hadn't had a chance to sit down and really think about what he wanted to do. I'm not sure yet," Michael admitted, feeling a pang of embarrassment. Mr. Harrison's smile tightened. "That's understandable. But don't let indecision hold you back for too long. Great leaders don't wait for the perfect moment to act. They create opportunities. I'll expect a proposal from you by the end of the month." The end of the month. Michael's heart sank. That wasn't much time at all. After the meeting, Michael found himself wandering the campus, his mind racing. The weight of Mr. Harrison's words hung over him like a shadow. Create a legacy. How was he supposed to do that when he still didn't even feel like he belonged here? The pressure to perform, to prove that he deserved to be at Crestfall, was starting to feel suffocating. As the days passed, Michael threw himself into his studies, trying to balance the heavy academic workload with his growing responsibilities in the leadership program. But no matter how hard he worked, the feeling of being out of place persisted. He could feel the distance between him and the other students growing, not shrinking. There were moments, small but significant, when he noticed just how different his life was from theirs. One afternoon, while sitting in the common room, Michael overheard a group of boys talking about their plans for the weekend. They casually mentioned going to a resort with their families, discussing private jets and expensive cars like they were no big deal. Michael couldn't relate. His weekends had always been spent at home with his mother, watching movies or going for walks in the park when she wasn't working long shifts at the hospital. Even in class, Michael found himself feeling like he was always a step behind. The other students spoke with a confidence that he hadn't yet mastered. Their contributions to discussions were sharp, articulate, and sometimes even rehearsed, as if they had been raised to speak like politicians or future CEOs. Michael's thoughts often felt more jumbled, and he struggled to keep up, afraid that if he spoke, his ideas would come out all wrong. But there were moments of light too, moments when Michael caught glimpses of the person he wanted to be. In his ethics and leadership class, they had a heated debate about social justice and community responsibility. For the first time, Michael felt a spark of passion, his thoughts becoming clear as he argued for the importance of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. After class, one of his classmates, a girl named Emily, came up to him. She was tall, with blonde hair neatly tied back, and an air of confidence that Michael admired but found intimidating. "That was a really good point you made," Emily said with a small smile. "I hadn't thought about it that way before." Michael blinked in surprise. Thanks," he stammered, not used to getting compliments from his peers at Crestfall. Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You should speak up more. You have good ideas." As she walked away, Michael stood there for a moment, replaying her words in his mind. Maybe he did have good ideas. Maybe he wasn't as out of place as he thought. That night, as he lay in bed, Michael tried to focus on the positive. Yes, Crestfall was hard. And yes, the expectations were high. But there were moments, like in class or during his conversations with Mr. Harrison, when he felt a flicker of hope, like maybe, just maybe, he could rise to the challenge. But there was still that looming deadline. The end of the month was coming fast, and Michael still had no idea what his community project would be. The pressure to come up with something meaningful was starting to weigh heavily on him. He couldn't afford to fail, not after everything his mother had sacrificed to get him here. But the more he thought about it, the more paralyzed he felt. What could he do that would make a real difference? What kind of legacy could a 12-year-old kid from a modest background really leave behind? The answers weren't coming, and with each passing day, the pressure grew. As Michael stared up at the ceiling, trying to quiet his racing thoughts, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would go back to his old neighborhood. Maybe if he reconnected with the place he had come from, he could find the inspiration he needed. The project wasn't just about him, it was about his community. And if he was going to make a difference, he needed to start by remembering where he came from. With that thought, he finally closed his eyes, hoping that tomorrow would bring the clarity he so desperately needed. Rediscovering roots. The next morning, Michael woke up with a sense of determination that had been missing for weeks. He had made up his mind. He needed to go back to his old neighborhood. He needed to remember why this opportunity mattered and reconnect with the place that had shaped him. After all, how could he create a project to help his community if he was losing touch with it? Lena was surprised when Michael told her his plan over breakfast. "You want to go back to the neighborhood?" she asked, pausing with her coffee cup midway to her lips. "I thought you'd want to spend the weekend working on that big school project." "I do," Michael replied, "but I think I need to go home first. Like, back to where we lived before. Maybe if I see everyone again, I'll figure out what kind of project I should be doing." Lena looked at him for a moment, her expression a mix of pride and concern. She had noticed the toll that Crestfall's high expectations were taking on her son. There had been late nights where she heard him moving restlessly in bed, and mornings where his usual energy seemed dimmed by the weight of pressure. But this morning, there was something different in his eyes, a spark of purpose that she hadn't seen in a while. "Okay," she said, nodding. "I'll drive you over." The drive back to their old neighborhood felt strangely nostalgic. It had only been a few weeks since Michael started at Crestfall, but in that short time, his world had changed so dramatically that his old life felt distant, like something from a past he had almost forgotten. As they turned onto the familiar streets lined with modest houses, a flood of memories came rushing back. The grocery store where Michael had defended the elderly couple was just a block away. He remembered how nervous he had been that day, standing up to the group of teenagers who had been harassing the Thompsons. That moment had felt huge to him, like an act of courage he wasn't sure he had in him. And yet it had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Crestfall, the leadership program, the mysterious SUV. It was hard to believe how much had changed since then. As they pulled up in front of their old house, Michael felt a wave of familiarity wash over him. The house was smaller than he remembered, but it still had the warmth of home. Neighbors were outside, talking on their porches or tending to their gardens. It was quieter here than the polished halls of Crestfall, but in a way that made it feel more real. "Do you want me to come with you?" Lena asked as she parked the car. Michael shook his head. "No, I think I need to do this on my own." Lena smiled softly. "All right. I'll be right here if you need me." Michael stepped out of the car and took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air on his face. He wasn't exactly sure where to start, but as he looked around, he realized he didn't need a plan. He just needed to walk, let his feet take him where they wanted to go. He started down the street, heading toward the park where he used to play basketball with his friends after school. The park was still the same, worn basketball court, rusted swings, and the same old bench where the older men in the neighborhood gathered to play chess. As he approached, he saw a familiar figure sitting on the bench. Mr. Johnson, an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for as long as Michael could remember. "Well, if it isn't young Michael," Mr. Johnson said with a toothy grin as Michael approached. "Been a while since I've seen you around these parts. You too fancy for us now, with that new school of yours." Michael laughed, but there was a tinge of guilt in his chest. "Nah, Mr. Johnson. Just been busy, that's all." Mr. Johnson nodded, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "I hear you. Life moves fast, doesn't it? One day you're playing ball with the kids, and the next, you're off learning how to run the world." Michael smiled, but the words hit him harder than Mr. Johnson probably intended. Running the world, that's what Crestfall seemed to expect from him. But here, in this park, it didn't feel like the world needed running. It needed something else, something more grounded, more human. "How's everything around here?" Michael asked, leaning against the bench. Mr. Johnson sighed, his face growing more serious. "It's been the same, mostly. People struggling to make ends meet, trying to get by. The park could use some fixing up, but you know how it is. Not a lot of money for things like that in neighborhoods like ours." Michael looked around. The park had always been a central gathering place for the community, but it was clear it had seen better days. The basketball court was cracked, the nets on the hoops were torn, and the playground equipment looked old and unsafe. Why hasn't anyone fixed it? Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Mr. Johnson shrugged. "The city's got bigger problems to worry about, I guess. But it's a shame. This park used to be full of kids. Now not so much." An idea began to form in Michael's mind. As he stared at the rundown park, he realized that this was the project he had been searching for. This was where he could make a difference. The leadership program wasn't just about impressing people at Crestfall or creating a flashy project to check off a box. It was about helping the people who mattered most to him. And this park, this community, had been his foundation. It was where he learned to stand up for others, where he learned the importance of kindness and justice. Now it was his turn to give back. "What if we could fix the park?" Michael said suddenly, the idea taking shape as he spoke. Mr. Johnson raised an eyebrow. "Fix the park? You mean, like organize some kind of fundraiser?" Michael shook his head. "No, bigger than that. What if we got the community involved? Kids, parents, everyone. We could clean it up, repair the equipment, maybe even plant a garden or put up some new benches. We could make it a place people actually want to come to again." Mr. Johnson smiled, the deep lines in his face softening. "That's a mighty big idea, Michael. You think you can pull it off?" Michael felt a surge of confidence. For the first time since joining Crestfall, he felt certain of something. "I think I can," he said. but I'm going to need help. Over the next few days, Michael threw himself into the project with more energy and focus than he had ever felt before. He went back to Crestfall with a new sense of purpose, meeting with Mr. Harrison to present his proposal. The project wasn't flashy or international like some of the other students' ideas, but it was meaningful. It was rooted in the values that had been instilled in him since childhood: community, responsibility, and making a tangible difference where it mattered most. Mr. Harrison listened intently as Michael explained his plan. "You want to revitalize the park in your old neighborhood?" he asked, tapping his fingers on the desk. "That's ambitious. Do you think the community will support you?" Michael nodded. "I know they will. The park used to be the heart of the neighborhood. If we can bring it back, it'll give people a reason to come together again. And I'll get the students at Crestfall involved too. We've got the resources. They've got the time." For the first time, Mr. Harrison's usually stoic expression softened. "I'm impressed, Michael. This isn't just about leadership. It's about legacy. You're not just creating something temporary. You're building something that could last." Michael felt a wave of pride. For the first time since arriving at Crestfall, he felt like he was finally living up to the expectations that had been placed on him. With Mr. Harrison's support, Michael began to rally the students at Crestfall. At first, it was slow going. Most of the students didn't understand why Michael was so focused on a small neighborhood park when they could be working on bigger, flashier projects. But slowly, as Michael explained his vision, more and more of them came on board. The leadership program even provided funding, and soon, what had started as an idea in Michael's mind was becoming a full-fledged initiative. Back in his old neighborhood, Michael began organizing community meetings. He went door to door, talking to neighbors, explaining the project, and gathering volunteers. He reconnected with old friends and teachers who were excited to see him taking charge. Even the local businesses got involved, offering to donate materials and resources to help with the renovations. On the day of the park's grand reopening, the neighborhood came alive. Dozens of volunteers, both from Crestfall and the community, gathered to work. Together, they painted fences, repaired playground equipment, and cleaned up the basketball court. Local artists painted murals, and children ran around, laughing and playing in a space that had once seemed forgotten. As the sun set that evening, Michael stood in the middle of the park, watching as families gathered for a celebration. Music played, food was shared, and the park, now vibrant and full of life, felt like the beating heart of the community once more. Lena stood beside him, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Michael," she said softly. "You really did it." Michael smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in weeks, the pressure and anxiety that had weighed him down lifted. This was his legacy, not just at Crestfall, but in the place that mattered most. And as he looked around at the smiling faces, he knew that this was only the beginning. He had found his place, not by fitting into Crestfall's world, but by staying true to his own.